How are you?
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Hola.
I'm good.
Hola.
I'm good. How are you? How's it going?
It's okay. Well, I was hoping, to have more participants, but apparently half of them are like on strike or something.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So it's kind of complicated, but
Yeah.
we're here. So we're happy to have you. Thank you.
Sure. It's been a while since I've seen you. How are you doing?
Well, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Ben, it's been like 20 years.
Yeah.
It's not a while, it's 20 years.
Yeah. It's not 40 years.
It's not 40.
Right.
Where are you living?
I'm in Marseille right now. So this is an apartment in Marseille. They have really high ceilings here. It's the main deal. But yeah, it's hot and things are, the government is a bit more stable, which is great. So I'm sorry for what all y'all are going through. It sounds intense. I hope it works out.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, their students are not sort of voting out to see, when does the semester restart. So we're sort of like in a limbo. So they are deciding, what to do. So we're sort of like, trying to move on with our lives and our projects and and not get too overwhelmed.
Depressed and overwhelmed. Sounds difficult.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much for accepting this invitation. I know you are busy and I know that you have a busy life. And so thank you.
Yeah, it's mostly that I have a 2-month-old baby who is more demanding than other things. Yeah, she's great.
Congratulations. That is so beautiful.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, it's cool.
So now you have like a hope or something? like
your life. Yeah, or something more. I mean, it's definitely a lot more concrete, I mean, like a creature that needs attention and food and love and is really, it's great. So
it's great. So congratulations.
Thanks.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So
how do you want to do this? So
first of all, well, I would like to tell you a little bit about who is the audience or who are the participants. So these are we are all, or they are all, students, or most of them are students of the video art workshop at the Universidad Nacional. And I know you have some experience with Latin America. So it would be fantastic that you also talk about that, like your relationship with Latin America, because I know that you've been in Cuba doing some workshops and in Mexico, etc. So perhaps that would be nice to talk about as well.
Sure.
And Magnolia, she's one of our students, and perhaps she has like a short introduction about your, like a short bio. So perhaps we can start like that. And yes, and I would like to have like a very comfortable, relaxed conversation, because I haven't seen you in so much time, long.
Sure.
But it's wonderful. It's wonderful. Yeah. I love your work, of course. That's super obvious, because that's why I invited you, because I think it combines, film and video, like film, video installation, performance. It sort of combines everything. And so I find that amazing and beautiful. So that's why I had you in mind, because we went to school together. And I always sort of saw you like, in the corridors, in those like dark rooms, doing these projections of film while everyone was sort of doing something else. You were always, sort of involved with film and the celluloid and all that materiality of film. So it would be wonderful to listen about that.
Yeah. Cool. Bueno. But is Magnolia going to say something first? She looks like she's preparing.
So.
Yeah.
Hola, ¿me escuchan?
Oui. Sí.
Bueno, hola a todas y todas. Voy a hacer una pequeña introducción. Entonces, bueno, Ben Russell es un artista, curador y cineasta experimental estadounidense, nacido en 1976 en Springfield, Massachusetts. Asistió a la Universidad de Brown hasta 1998, donde recibió una licenciatura en arte y semiótica. Asimismo, recibió la maestría en cine y video de la Escuela del Instituto de Arte de Chicago en 2003 y en 2008 recibió una beca Guggenheim. De 2006 a 2011, Ben se desempeñó como profesor asistente en la Universidad de Illinois en Chicago. Su trabajo curatorial sigue su realización cinematográfica, que se desarrolla entre el cine experimental y una forma de etnografía especulativa, o como él lo ha llamado, psicodélica. También se ha desempeñado como curador del Magic Lantern Cinema en Providence, Rhode Island. Además, ha realizado giras por todo el mundo con programas de cine, video y performance, y fue nombrado por CinemaScope en 2012 como uno de los 50 mejores cineastas menores de 50 años. Por otro lado, su trabajo se ha dado a conocer anchamente gracias a los numerosos cortometrajes que realizó a lo largo de la década del 2000, muchos como parte de su serie Trips. En 2009 presentó su primer largometraje, Let Each One Go Where He May, filmado en Suriname. Este filme es una serie de 13 tomas largas realizadas con una Steadicam y fue estrenada en la competencia Tiger Awards en el Festival Internacional de Cine de Rotterdam 2010, y gracias a este recibió el Premio Internacional de la Crítica otorgado por la Federación Internacional de la Prensa Cinematográfica. Su tercer largometraje, Good Luck, se estrenó en la competencia internacional en el Festival de Cine Locarno 2017 y fue votada como la mejor película experimental de 2017 por la Sociedad Nacional de Críticos de Cine. Para finalizar, sus obras han tenido múltiples proyecciones individuales y exposiciones en lugares como el Centro Georges Pompidou, el Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de Chicago, el Festival de Cine de Rotterdam, el Centro Wexner para las Artes, el Biennale, el Museo de Arte Moderno y también en Casas Ocupas. Russell es autor de más de 30 filmes y su trabajo ha sido escrito como un encuentro transformador de elementos de etnografía, psicodelia y surrealismo, desafiando las convenciones de la representación documental para producir experiencias intensas, hipnóticas y a veces alucinantes. Bienvenido, Ben, y gracias por acompañarnos el día de hoy.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Yo puedo hablar un poquito de español, pero ahora pienso que nos trae bien parce que je peux apprendre le français pour parler en Marseille. Right. So it's better if I speak in English so I don't contaminate my rusty Spanish with my new
French.
French, oui.
Fantastic.
C'est ça. Aye, aye, aye. See. But thank you for the introduction. Yeah, so I need to leave at 6 o'clock-ish, 6:15, so I have about an hour with you all, and I would propose that in the sort of tradition of the Reddit ask me anything, people should feel free to ask me anything at any point. Maybe you can send it as a chat message, and so if you have a question, I can answer it, or I cannot answer it as well as I wish. And I'll try to integrate things into the general conversation. Maybe it makes sense to talk about what I'm doing right now, because I've been making films and videos and installations and performances since 1998, which feels like a long time. So I can share my screen. Oh, can you enable my screen sharing?
Yes.
Gracias.
Okay. Now you can share.
Oh, I'm the host. Look at that. Let's go this. Share. So there should be a picture of me, and so that's me on the left, and that's me making a movie. That's my camera, an Aton XTR Super 16 camera. And this is a still from a new feature film, my fourth, called The Invisible Mountain, which is a kind of complicated project, but I can say that initially it was going to be a feature film, and then it also became a kind of like very large sound installation, and then it became a multi-channel, like a 8-channel video installation. And then it became a feature. So this was all, it's one project that had multiple ways of materializing, based a little bit about a guy. It's maybe a documentary about a Finnish wanderer, this guy on the right, Tuomo Tuominen, who you might recognize if you saw A Spell Toward Off the Darkness. He's the guy who has the finger in the asshole story. And so this film it's kind of like a spin-off from my second feature that I made with Ben Rivers, which is an interesting idea for experimental or art cinema or something, to think about these tropes of narrative cinema, Hollywood cinema. But anyway, so I can also say the film is shot on film, and I've been working on film since 1998. I've made a few videos, but not really. I've mostly worked on 16mm, and although now I work in Super 16, which means that most of my films are shown as digital projections. And the reason for that is because of the sound, usually, that the sound in Super 16 and digital is 5.1, so which means that I can think about cinema as a space and not just as a time. So this project, Mount Analog, it's a book by René Daumal. It's a fictional book about a group of wanderers who try to find a utopian mountain. Oh wait, I have to admit, yes. Who are trying to find a mountain that is the bridge between heaven and earth, floating in the middle of the ocean. It was written in 1952. It's a quick read, so it was also the inspiration for Alejandro Jodorowsky's Holy Mountain, and some works by Patti Smith, John Zorn, Philippe Perrino. So it has a lot of currency, in part because the author, René Daumal, actually died before he finished the book. So there's a real, like, really serious cliffhanger in that we don't, the author actually physically dies. So this idea of my film, The Invisible Mountain, is to create, to take an existing documentary figure and ask him to try to find something that obviously doesn't exist. And so we took 2 months and drove from northern Finland to an island off the coast of Greece, looking for this invisible mountain. And along the way, we tried to go to the tallest mountain of every country that we went through, and that was Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece. So it was all this sort of trajectory that we made, looking for this thing that doesn't exist. And in the beginning of the film, we were traveling with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 8 other people. They were members of 3 different bands, and I kind of booked a concert tour, and we played 5 shows. So the film begins as this concert film where I'm shooting people performing, and then the character Tuomo sort of breaks off and keeps traveling. So there's some sweaty drumming, some foggy, some red dress, red clothing, wood gathering. And and so we went from Finland to Greece. That's the crew that I work with. Very small. There's Ben Rivers on the far left. He was a collaborator for A Spell Toward Off the Darkness, and in this film, he just shot a little bit of it. He filmed a bit of the black and white stuff. Ellen de Grandcourt, who I've worked with before, she's a focus puller camera assistant. Chris Fawcett, a Steadicam operator in the middle, he filmed Let Each One Go Where He May, parts of A Spell Toward Off the Darkness, Good Luck, and Jakob Munishaba, who also worked as a sound recordist on Good Luck. So I try to work with the same people, and I try to keep my crew quite small, but we were all in a van for 2 months, which was a bit intense. Also, I work with Nicola Becker, who just received an Oscar for Best Sound Design, which is quite exciting. He's like a real sound genius. And this is on the boat that almost sank with all of our equipment on it. Not a great moment. Prior to this film, or in preparation for this film, I started to do a live performance using a video synthesizer and a modular synthesizer. That's a modular synthesizer, which is basically just like a contemporary keyboard without any keys. So you connect all of the points with cables. And in this performance, I'm pushing sound through a video synthesizer, which produces image. So sound is controlling image. And over the course of 30 minutes, I try to raise a mountain out of the ground. And the mountain is a projected pixel, really haptic, very active video piece. You can see, it's a really intense, stroboscopic flicker experience. And this is the sound installation that I did with Nicola Becker. It was in UNAM in Mexico City, and it was huge. The ceiling had a lot of light, and so there wasn't the possibility of doing any kind of video projection. And it seemed exciting to try to make something that was totally sonic. And so we basically created a mountain out of sound. And we did that by using these parabolic speakers, which if you point a sound into them, become really focused. The sound reflects outwards and it's direct. It's like a sonic laser. And we put them into the center of a space. So you can see that those parabolas point into the center, they bounce off the panels that are in the center, and they create a really specific sound in the center, whereas the sound outside of that is really general and vague. And the sound itself was a composition made out of a series of different field recordings where we begin in the ocean and end up on the top of a mountain. So over the course of an hour, you kind of transit sonically from one space to another space to another space. And there are some other things that are interfering along the way. And then this is the 7 channel installation with 2 neon sculptures and some sculptural objects, which was another way of thinking about this quest, this search for an invisible mountain that we had gone on. And this is essentially what the exhibition was. I painted everything black and put down some rubber flooring so that the sound would be absorbed, but also so that it would feel different. And the front image is on a 10-minute loop. The back image is on a 4-minute loop without any sound. And then you walk through there into a room that has 3 screens, which you can only see 2 at a time, on which there are 3 different 75-minute loops that share a little bit of material, but are mostly, the things are happening simultaneously, but they're happening in relation to each other, but rarely repeating. So it was a way of creating this kind of space. And there are these deeper blue tones and green tones that happen in the course of it. And then at the end of the space was a sort of reframing of this conjuring performance that I had done, where I made it into the thing that happens when you reach the end of your quest. So, in addition to this stuff, and so that's, I guess, a good frame for it. Again, if any of you have any questions, you can send me a message, which I assume I'll get. And if you don't have any questions, because I can't see any of you or hear any of you, I will just continue to speak. Yeah, sounds good. I'm going to do it. Look at that. Any tech about those screens? Yeah, that's good. So there's a question about, the screens themselves. I guess you can see, it's a little difficult to see, but you can tell from this image that I had these screens made. They're triangular. Everything was a triangle. which had to do with these three sides, and also the mountain as a certain kind of shape. You can see that triangle in the background, which was there were windows going out to the street, and so I just blocked off a tiny bit so that there would also be a sense of the outside in there. But the screens themselves were built on triangular screens. I wanted them to have presence and not just be as if they existed on the wall. So generally when I do installation, I think about, I should say, I've been working in film and installation for a long time concurrently. And because I really love cinema and I really love what happens in cinema, it's never felt good enough to me to just project a film on a wall in a gallery and treat it as some kind of impoverished cinema. I really want the gallery space. I want the film to do something different in the gallery space. And my understanding of that has meant that I need to change the way the space operates or think about the space, really take it into consideration. And so on a very small way, taking the screen off the wall and making it into an object, does that. It forces you into a mobile subject who walks around it or navigates it in some way. It also creates an architecture that forces you to think about the other architecture that's there. And yeah, with this show, I wanted to make these screens sort of as big as possible, so that you could feel overwhelmed by them. And I think, yeah, and they're just HD projections. Also, I guess what was really exciting and complicated about this, you can see one of the smaller screens there in the back. Oh yes, you can see the three screens in the shot. This one to the left, the one in the center, and then this one, which is the smallest of the three screens. So you can't ever see all of them simultaneously, but you could get a sense, so you would move around them, and the projectors are all ceiling mounted. The exciting thing about this was the sound system. So each of these screens had 2 speakers in them, and then there were so 2, 4, 6 speakers, or maybe 9, and then there were about 7 other speakers around the space, which meant that there was this total sound that was happening, as well as a specific sound from each screen. So it was quite complicated and quite exciting. Also, at the end of every loop, which was 72 minutes, all of the screens would rotate. So you would never have the same experience of the space twice, which felt important in thinking about how to make a quest, a journey, a physical experience into a physical experience, how to think about projection as a physical experience, how to think about light in a sculptural way, and to really try to get people to be in there. And this last image again is also, it's a double projection that is canted off the screen, and it was in a room that had a glossy, a shiny floor, and so it was really stroby and active and visceral. So thinking again about all of the stuff that's there, instead of trying to paint over it and ignore it and pretend as if it's not in the space. Yeah, so right, so along with this film, which again is a feature film, there was Let Each One Go Where He May, a film that I made in 13 shots in Suriname in 2009, A Spell to Ward Off the Darkness, which all of you have seen, I believe, and you can ask me questions about this movie. Something that Ben Rivers and I is like a totally pure collaboration, in that we never worked on the film if we weren't both in the same room. So we filmed in the first section, which was in Estonia, where we kind of put together a commune. We brought together 15 people and had them live in one site for 30 days and filmed a series of conversations. All of them were involved in one way or another with utopian collectives or communal structures. And so we wanted them to have conversations that they could sort of expand into some other, or like, we wanted them to talk to each other in ways that we could film them talking and then use the material to sort of propel this idea around what each section was. So in A Spell to Ward Off the Darkness, there are 3 parts. There's, I only have 2 here, but the first, well, we could say this. The first part is in this commune. The second part was in the woods in northern Finland, where there's one guy sort of walking through space. And the third section was filmed in a Norwegian black metal club, where we again put together, we created this black metal super group and had them play, booked a show for them with some other bands, and then filmed it, told the venue that we were making a music video. And so we used that material to make this project. In terms of writing or process, I mean, most of it, both Ben Rivers and I think are working more within a documentary framework and are not great writers. We don't really, for my part, I don't write scripts. I'm not, I write a lot of proposals and a lot of synopses and put forth a lot of ideas about how things want to happen. But because my subject is the world, it always feels, I'm always afraid of getting trapped in predetermining what the world is going to look like. But in this case, we were really clear that we wanted to make a film that thought about utopia, the possibilities of utopia in a very real way, but recognized the sort of implicit failure of utopia. And so we wanted to, there's the last shot in the first section is of a conversation, or close to the last shot is a conversation looking out across this ruined building in a lake. And it felt sort of like that's what the regard to commune or collective living was, is that you can see the ruins, but you're still talking about the possibilities on the shore. And each section kind of had that in a certain sense. So within that context, we also thought really clearly about how we wanted to represent each space, how we wanted to represent each time. And so for the first section, we shot in Estonia, which we referred to as collective. Ben Rivers and I both filmed handheld, which I had never really done very much before that. We had one sound recordist who was recording direct sound. And when we mixed, and we decided that conversations would sort of be the way that this thing moved. So we filmed these conversations. We were thinking a bit about Jean Rouch and this Edgar Morin, this film called Chronicle of a Summer, Chronique d'un Être. And as a way of, like, in a way, it was the most documentary of any of the sections that we were doing. We wanted the editing to be pretty like narrative facing leaning, so that you had a sense that it was happening around the same time. And in terms of the sound mix, we also made sure to have voices that you could always hear people whenever in every shot, even if you didn't see them. There was always the presence of bodies. And so this was a strategy to think about the idea of collectivity within a very human scale. In the second section, which was entirely filmed here in Salmi in northern Finland in an old growth forest, we decided that, and this was thinking more about the natural sublime, this idea of like about Thoreau and Walden Pond, or we're thinking about Ted Kaczynski, who was the Unabomber, who built a cabin out in Montana, I think, and was sending mail bombs to mathematicians and scientists. And so we wanted to think about the natural world as a time that was a lot longer than other kinds of time. And so we wanted to diminish the presence of the human within it. So we filmed with on tripods, we had direct sound, and we always placed the figure in a way so that he wasn't, frame the figure so that he wasn't the foreground. He was scaled down in relation to the world to just make the sense of the world present. And I think this section is a bit shorter than the first one, but it feels longer because the shots are longer and we're just spending a lot of time listening. And in the sound mix, we also made sure that there wasn't a front, that there was a side. The sound kind of existed in totality. And the third section, this black metal section, experience, the experience of having a body, of being a body. And in that sense, we wanted it to feel like it was one shot that was happening in real time, and where as the camera moved in this sort of floating kind of omniscient narrator way, that we would move with the camera. And so the sound also moves with the camera, which in a 5.1 environment, you can really hear and feel. And the idea was to place the audience within that space. And so taken as a whole, those three instances are all formal ways of understanding ideological positions or creative positions, to think about theory and praxis as being aligned. And the triangle is there as a presence because there's a dialectic that happens between these sections that produces a certain kind of proposition, which is a totality. So we thought about Godard's beginning, middle, and end, but not in that order. And we're just trying to make something that was a whole, but the whole was experienced after the fact in a way. Yeah, there's, in terms of funding, I can say that this film, you can see it on this poster, was funded by Rouge International, which is a French producer, Black Hand, which is an Estonian producer, and Arte France. And I think the budget for this film was probably, I don't know because I didn't produce it, but I think it was probably between 170,000 and 250,000, which feels like a lot of money to everybody who doesn't have any money, but within the framework of film production or narrative or feature-length film production, it's very, very small, which in a way made it harder to get money to make it. But Dan and I were used to making films for $500, $5,000. This, I would say, this is at the time, this is the most expensive film that I had made. And that doesn't mean that we were paid very much for it. I think the both of us were paid like $10,000, so $5,000 each, which is not a lot of money. But then the film won prizes and was on a festival circuit and did some stuff. We also presented it a lot in these sort of co-production funding spaces, which exist in festivals, like Cinemart in Rotterdam. I think we presented it there. FID Marseille, FID Lab, we also presented it. And we actually won a prize in FID Lab, which was 2 airline tickets anywhere in the world. And we used those to make a different film. I made the film in Vanuatu, whose name is very long and I just forgot. But yeah, so that was the experience of funding with this. With my first feature film, Let Each One Go Where He May, I won the Guggenheim, which was $50,000, and the film cost $55,000. And most of that was just material, costs. Again, I didn't pay people very much, just don't. Yeah, thank you. The Vanuatu film was Let Us Persevere in What We Have Resolved Before We Forget. And yeah, so A Spell to Ward Off the Darkness going forwards, I guess Good Luck is my third feature, and it's a film that I made again in two sections. Well, again, it's in 2 sections, and the first half is filmed in an underground copper mine in Serbia. And the second section is filmed in a Surinamese gold mine, illegal gold mine, which is with the same people who populated Let Each One Go Where He May. I had lived in Suriname for a few years, and I've been going back and making films with folks who live there. I speak Saramaccan and Saran and Tongo, and have some kind of a relationship with people, but I always pay, like I said, I pay the people I work with. And yeah, this film was something that I had imagined making while finishing A Spell to Ward Off the Darkness. Good Luck was funded, it was produced by a French production company and a German production company. We received, here in Europe, the money is not investment-based, it comes out of national funds. And so we received national money that was allocated by the German government to spend a certain amount of money in Germany, money allocated by the French government to spend a certain amount in French. And I would say that the way that I work, which is quite autonomous and with a small crew and in countries that tend to not have really strong funding bodies, makes it difficult to get money to make these things. So I found that everything that I've made is quite different. And I can say, just to answer final question, well, let's see. So I'll just talk about Good Luck for a second, because so this film is half is in Suriname, half is in Serbia. And I actually tried to make the same film in both places, kind of understanding that it wasn't possible, and that the proposition that people are the same, or that labor constructs bodies in the same way in multiple spaces, was perhaps flawed, but I was interested in that inquiry. And I knew Suriname really well. So we went to Serbia to film first, and I spent a month filming there with a small crew, and then spent a month filming in Suriname and tried to film things that were connected to what had happened in Serbia. This film, Good Luck, was also first presented as a multi-channel 5-channel video installation in Kessel in Documenta 14, sort of remarkably in this underground space where whereas the film proposes one space in linear time, you experience one space and then you experience another, and you think about the first when you're in the second. The proposition of presenting the film as an installation seemed to be more about being able to hear multiple spaces simultaneously. And so it was installed in a pretty large space, this cavernous area where you would walk in, you would experience one screen, and while you were there, you would hear the sound of drilling or explosions, mining happening somewhere else. But you would have to walk around this whole space in order to get to that somewhere else. And in the process, you would pass through another projection and another projection. This is a projection. It's just a wall that was built and painted white. And then it was mapped to fit onto that screen. The image is a black and white image that was these portraits of miners that I hand processed. In this, there was one big screen, another big screen that mapped out projection, and a smaller television screen. So the space was really sort of organized, and lighting was specific, and it was a bit too dark initially, so they had to turn it up. But it was a really like haptic experience of sound. You could really get lost in the space, which was nice. And so this film, as a feature film, premiered in competition in Locarno, where there's €100,000 first prize. So it was like an exciting place to be. I didn't win anything, which is fine. Wang Bing won, which is wonderful. But there was a fellow on the jury who is a philanthropist, film producer, cinephile, and he offered to fund my next film while we were having drinks, while I was at this festival. And so that's where the money for The Invisible Mountain came from, is from this one Greek individual who has funded a lot of films in Greece, Yorgos Lanthimos, Athena Sangari, and also supports the Sundance Foundation, and a lot of other things. So it was really, really lucky that I was there at this festival to show the film, so that I could meet this guy and make the next thing. But as for the thing after that, I don't know what's next, really. These images. Maria wants me to talk about Tana and Vanuatu. So let me see if I can, I'll arrive there. Because prior to these feature films, I was making a series of short films that are more like experimental films that were definitely coming from a different economic position of living in the US and teaching or being a grad student, although I wasn't making these when I was a graduate student, but not having very much access to funds, but access to resources. And so these films were shorter, 16 millimeter usually, some are hand processed, some are optically printed. And also some appeared as installations at the same time. They're all films that I always thought about as having like one gesture that changes. And it was a series that it was really nice to work in because I didn't know what the next thing was going to be, but each next thing would be informed by what had happened previously, which was a great experience. And then at a certain point, I felt like I figured out what it was. I found what I was looking for, and it was time to move into a kind of different body of work. And that different body of work, as it happens, I'm skipping past these, river rights, was a series of, I decided that I had kind of figured out what happens in time. I'd made a lot of films which were like 7 to 10 minutes, single shot, where the camera was choreographed and the action was choreographed and something kind of happened. And I felt like I understood that movement of time and I wanted to try something else. So, and that something else was simultaneously handheld shooting and editing and also text. So I began to change the way I filmed a bit, thinking about gathering images, gathering sounds, and then bringing them back together after a while. One of these films that I made early on, Let Us Persevere and What We Have Resolved Before We Forget, is a film that I went with Ben Rivers originally to collaborate on. We had the idea that we would both make a film simultaneously, but not together. And Vanuatu is in Melanesia, and my interest in going to Vanuatu had everything to do with the fact that America, or let's say the United States, los Estados Unidos, was seen in a really positive light because of the American military's involvement in Vanuatu during World War II. They were really generous and treated people well. And there was a relationship between African-American soldiers and the Ni Vanuatu people who are dark-skinned and were treated quite poorly by the colonial, the occupying powers in France and Britain. So when they saw these African-American soldiers who were on the same level as white soldiers, it sort of opened things up and I think created some idea of what America could be. And they were also quite generous with candy bars and toilet paper and other things. They had an excess of material. But so I wanted to go to this place and think about America as a United States American, to think about the USA in this place, which led me to Tana and led me to a specific community, which was a cargo cult community. Maria can talk about it more, I think, because she spent a lot of time there. But if like trying to make a portrait of a place that was somewhat precarious, this village is right next to, it's right underneath a volcano, so you can hear this volcano erupting all of the time. If you want to swim in the ocean, you can't because there are crazy jellyfish and sharks everywhere. And then the place to swim is in the hot springs because you're on a mountain that is a volcano. And so it's a strange zone. But what's interesting about the cargo cult is that, in my understanding, it was a way to resist colonialism, and especially a way to resist religious power within the history of Vanuatu. And it involved the creation of a mythology of a god who said, if you throw everything from the west in the ocean, then you'll free yourself from the colonial powers, and then later on your ancestors will send it all back to you. So it wasn't a back to the roots movement. It was really about trying to reclaim a certain kind of power position of a subjected population. So as a filmmaker who's making a 20-minute film, as like a white United States American male, I never feel especially well positioned to speak on behalf of other people, to speak for them. And so my strategy has always been informed by somebody like Trinity Minha, to speak next to or around or nearby, which I think is why the films that result from these experiences, which we could also include Greetings to the Ancestors, a film that was shot with some in Swaziland with some Pentecostal animists and dream healers in South America, or maybe even in Suriname, a film that was a portrait of a white man who was accused of eating children, that there's a sort of deeper poetics in dealing with how these subjects kind of manifest, that I'm not pointing at or determining what things are, but rather producing a collision of spaces that give you a kind of visceral experience of them, which is closer to understanding than to knowing, which for me is one of the ways to resist this like Western regime of knowledge and power. And yeah, Atlantis is a sort of different take on it, a way of trying to make a portrait of a city, a portrait of a place as an idea, or a portrait of an idea as a place. So Atlantis was really a portrait of Malta and a little bit of Greece, but it was a way of thinking about it as the lost city of Atlantis. And Colorblind is also a film that I made in French Polynesia and the Marquesas, mostly a little bit in Tahiti, where I was thinking a lot about Gauguin, who he was, what kind of a Gauguin I am, if I had anything to say about it, and I didn't have much. And more about thinking about how colonialism could eventually operates in both directions, that the people who are colonized begin to go to the places that colonize them and create their own communities there. And so this film, which is 30 minutes, about 10 minutes of it is shot in a northern French village, but you don't have any sense that it's not Polynesia because it looks like Polynesia. The people are Polynesian. This is their experience. And simultaneously trying to think about language and color. So the films are dense, and I mean, these films are dense. They have a lot of ideas in them, but I often think about this quote by Maya Deren, who was describing poetic cinema and saying that, you know, poetry tends to be vertical, whereas narrative tends to be horizontal. And in narrative, a thing leads to another thing, and leads to another thing. In poetry, there's a verticality where things are just accumulating upwards. And that accumulation produces this like general sensation, this feeling, but it's hard to sustain over a long time because because density is really heavy. So yeah, now I feel like I'm in a slightly different position in terms of the short film work, and I'm maybe I'm going to start work on a film here in Marseille that's based a little bit on a text by Walter Benjamin about smoking hash, but maybe it's more about trying to create a feeling through a film that is also a place. Yeah, so here's some installation views. Other things: nothing is true, everything is alive. So that's Manthia Diawara. Performances. I make a lot of work, and I've always made a lot of work, and I try to work in different modalities just to it always feels like stretching to keep my limbs active, because making a feature takes about 4 years. the financing takes 3 years, and the making takes a year. So in that process, I want to do other things, and those other things tend to be short films, but then the short films are sometimes slower they also require different financing or funds or commissions. And so performances become other ways to activate my brain and to engage in the ideas that I have, also a little bit of like sculpture. And then, as was mentioned in the introduction, I've been a curator for a long time. So I used to run a screen series of films that were all thematically organized, and they were like narrative, experimental films mixed with some documentaries, ethnographic films. Used to tour a lot with the film programs and live performances. And I ran a gallery called Ben Russell with somebody else in Chicago for a few years, and put together a festival in Greece, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of different things. Let me find an image to rest on. Here, this is good. So this was from this 3-day festival that I organized in Athens called Hallucinations, where I think there were 17 programs of films, lectures, performances, installations, workshops, things that would change from day to day, and a rooftop cinema where we could show films that would respond to other things that were happening. Everything was organized around the idea of the hallucination. And I think that's probably the extent of it. I mean, I should say that I was a professor. I taught at the University of Illinois in Chicago, at Brown University, at Museum School of Fine Arts at Emerson in the US. But I haven't done that for about 10 years. And in the last 10 years, I've been a full-time artist. And yeah, I give a lot of workshops. So that's what's taken me to EIC TV, Experimental Instituto de Televisor in Cuba, which is a really interesting place to go. Although one should be aware that you're going to Cuba and the government is yeah, it's tough. And the school there aren't any Cuban students in the school, but there are a lot of Latin Americans, South Americans. That's very interesting. I've been there for 3 years. I've spent a lot of time in Mexico showing films with Ambulante, putting together programs, showing programs. And yeah, probably because I'm from California and grew up in a really sort of Mexican milieu, it feels close and familiar. It's something I really miss actually by being in France. But when I was teaching, it always felt like the same thing that curating programs does, like a way to show works to other people and to make arguments for things that I like, and also to understand how work changes. And yeah, the problem with just being an artist is that it's quite boring. Like I know spend the most time with my own work, and then talking about my own work it's not so expansive. But so I really enjoy, I should say, the sort of critical engagement with students, to be able to have to think and rethink and move around ideas and films and texts, and to see them change, which they do. Like nothing we make is static, everything is changing relationally. So that's been, yeah, something I really miss. But it's something that I search out in these engagements that I do as visiting artists or advisors or whatever. And yeah, I studied, my entrance into all of this happened when I was an undergraduate student, and I was studying from 1994 to 1998. And I was studying, in order to make films at this school, you had to first take a year of critical theory, media theory, cultural theory, semiotic theory courses, which is to say you had to sort of understand a discourse around media before you were allowed to make the media. And that was really exciting. And it meant that when I first started really committedly watching ethnographic films, which I studied for a year in Australia, and I did that then, I wasn't, or when it moved into documentary, I'd read so much theory about the construction of the image that I've never really believed that the documentary image exists as a pure thing, as an objective thing. I'm always aware of the frame, the thing that's being framed that is not being framed, the sound that's being recorded that's not being recorded, the editing that leaves out the things that have been recorded. And so I've always had a pretty loose relationship to a nonfiction space, or the idea of making nonfiction, which I feel is really evident in my work, where I don't call it documentary work. I don't call it experimental work, but I tend to just call it nonfiction, which feels like a nice zone, nice swimming pool to float in, if you will. Yeah. So if you have any more questions, throw them at me. I can give you a few more minutes, then I need to depart.
Well, Ben, thank you. That was so interesting, really. I mean, like, so interesting, that's like redundant, right? But I mean, like, fascinating. You do, I mean, like, persevere a lot in your work, I think, right?
I mean, it's a lot. I mean, I've made a lot of stuff. And some of it is nice, and some of it is not so nice. So there's a good breadth of it, and I'm excited. I think generally in my practice, I didn't say this, but I've been really influenced by music, and I always think about making cinema as a way of like making movies, and making albums, where if you make a great album, the next thing you make, like, you can do the same thing, or you can try to do something else. And I try to push my practice forward, to shift its terrain, to go into other areas. And I would say it's maybe more recently that my work looks like itself, whereas for a while it felt like the formal concerns were really pushed around into all of the ideological concerns or the content concerns. So there wasn't so much continuity. But yeah, maybe it's getting evener. I don't know, but it's nice to be in, because also I always feel surprised that I'm still making things, or uncertain about what's going to happen next, which is a difficult place to be in, but ultimately like a good one. Yeah.
And can you tell us a bit about your next project? I mean, like, what are you planning?
I don't know. The pandemic has made things really difficult, so I haven't felt. Also, the film that I started off talking about, The Invisible Mountain, actually finished 8 months ago, and I've been waiting to show it in the cinemas. So I just haven't released it, and I felt like I made a cake that's really, now I think it's probably pretty delicious, but nobody can eat it, and so I don't want to like make another cake in the meantime, like a different cake. You know, it's been difficult to start something else, because all the things that I love, like live music, cinema, performance, seeing art with friends, like dance, you know, like none of it's been possible. So I feel like I haven't been so inspired, but it's clicking back in now. It's beginning to happen. Yeah. So I think I gotta go. But
okay, so
thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for talking with us and talking about your work, which is fantastic. We love it and we are intrigued by it. So we will, stay in touch, and thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you.
And if any of you have other questions, feel free to send me an email, which you can find on my website. I'm happy to answer things. Yeah. So take care. Thank you, and strength, courage, right? Like,
yeah.
All right. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm gonna make you the leader. Wait, assign a new host.
Bueno, buenísimo. Bueno, muchas gracias a todos y todas por acompañarnos en esta sesión. Creo que la grabé, entonces voy a intentar subir algo. Es mucha información, es una persona impresionantemente veloz en todo lo que está diciendo. Entonces no sé si quieran comentar algo antes de irnos. ¿Cómo están?
Es muy prolífico él, ¿no? O sea, tiene muchísimos trabajos y de muy buena calidad, o sea, afuera son muy buenos todos.
Sí, muy buenos. Es muy interesante ver cómo logra, digamos, integrar el cine y el video y el performance, o sea, como todos esos elementos y distintos elementos en su trabajo, ¿no? Y además persistir y seguir haciéndolo y lograr como que sean tan exitosos, porque por lo general, digamos, en nuestros contextos, ¿no es cierto?, los artistas como que les cuesta mucho más trabajo darle continuidad a las propuestas, como que se ven interrumpidos muchos procesos. O sea, hay poco espacio para el error, digamos, en términos como de experimentación, pero me parece interesante cómo ha, digamos, sabido además evadir las cuestiones tan complejas en relación a la representación. Porque, digamos, estamos en tiempos difíciles y complejos que tiene que ver con todo esto de la representación, ¿no? Donde todo el mundo está como consciente de su posición y, digamos, su privilegio, de dónde viene o qué, ¿no? Entonces me interesó muchísimo eso que dijo de hablar desde el lado, hablar con y no hablar sobre. Entonces me parece que por eso, digamos, sus documentales tienen muy poca como voz en off, sino que siempre es como el sonido ambiente y me gustó también eso que dijo de la metodología, ¿no? De esos métodos que él no escribe guiones, no escribe guiones, así sean películas de ficción, sino que son como premisas donde deja como que escoge tres escenas, por ejemplo en A Spell Toward of the Darkness, ¿no? Que escogió tres momentos, son tres escenas, lo que ocurre con la comuna, lo que ocurre en el bar con este performance de los músicos, ¿no? Y lo otro que es la búsqueda de la espiritualidad del cantante, ¿no? Entonces son esos tres momentos y nada más, y esos tres momentos los logra como integrar en esta narrativa de ficción, pero bajo una precisa bastante documental, donde la realidad es como lo más importante. Entonces eso me pareció interesante y me gustó muchísimo que es tan consciente eh, de, de su posición como, digamos, hombre blanco, ¿no? Y entonces como negocia eso como con todo, no sé. ¿Ustedes qué les llamó mucho la atención? ¿No? ¿Qué les pareció, digamos, más interesante de, del trabajo de Ben? ¿O qué fue lo favorito? Y además que yo siempre cuando lo veía, o sea, cuando estaba estudiando, siempre lo veía que era muy con el tema del cine y, digamos, poco con el video. Y me parece muy sorprendente ser prolífico y seguir, pero además seguir haciendo cine, ¿no? Con lo difícil que es hacer cine, ¿no? Para nosotros, sobre todo en estos países. O sea, para nosotros cine es como una especie de ideal romántico. Pocas personas pueden hacer el shooting en cine y rodar en cine, ¿no? Hoy en día están haciendo muchas cosas en digital por precisamente ahorrar pues por presupuestos. Entonces me parecía también como interesante oírlo insistir en esto de lo cinemático y el cine, ¿no? Y por eso yo le preguntaba tanto por lo de Tana, porque el título me recordó muchísimo a esa perseverancia, creo que tiene que ver con eso, ¿no? Como perseverar en esa búsqueda de una utopía y una felicidad que además está siempre del lado de la ruina, ¿no? Y son como en estos lugares, en estas locaciones además fascinantes, porque además las películas se pueden ver, o sea, podemos acceder a su sitio web y ver su trabajo sin, creo que grandes, digamos, grandes logros de su trabajo, en mi opinión. Tiene una, digamos, impecable manejo del sonido, pero además de los silencios y además de esa capacidad para envolverlo a uno, ese sonido, que aunque tú lo estás viendo en un laptop, aunque lo estás viendo en un computador, digamos que logran las piezas cautivarte, y aunque pueden ser, digamos, un poco densas para ver en el computador, porque están pensadas para ser proyectadas, de alguna manera aún así funcionan y aún así las podemos ver y aún así las podemos disfrutar. También ese interés por la música, el sonido, me parece que sí es clave, pero también me encanta esa metodología de trabajo que tiene, que están de la mano del cinema verité, y estas metodologías que tienen más que ver con el documental que con la actuación, ¿no? Pero de alguna manera también también me parece que lo que él escoge y lo que decide, digamos, integrar a lo que queda dentro de su final cut, pues, no sé, no hablamos de edición nada, ni alcanzó a hablar nada de eso, pero digamos sí sería interesante como preguntarle más sobre eso, o sea, de eso no alcanzamos ni siquiera a hablar. ¿Qué quieren comentar? Habló de todo, mostró todos sus trabajos, y además que me encantó muchísimo. Muchas gracias por esa generosidad, y ni siquiera pudimos decirle que gracias, pero muchas gracias. Qué lindo. ¿Alguien quiere comentar algo así como para terminar?
Sí, yo no pude
Hola,
encontrar.
¿cómo estás?
Hola, profe. Yo vi unos cortos, los que estaban como en Vimeo, pero no encontré las pelis, y los cortos me gustó mucho, que hay como cierta atmósfera como sí, como un extrañamiento en sus cortos, como que uno siente una atmósfera rara, y que no entiende completamente. Sí, eso me pareció como muy interesante. También que usa muchos espejos, eso también me
Sí,
llamó la atención.
que es como muy sí, como me parece que también hacía como homenaje a Agne Bagdad, y fíjate que habló de Maya Deren también, ¿no? Esto del cine, de que el círculo, de que el mito es circular, ¿no? Que la narrativa es lineal, ¿no? Y que la poesía es vertical, como acumulaciones. Entonces ese es como ese interés también en los volcanes, en las montañas, y como lo sagrado. Y entonces hay como, me parece que hay mucho misticismo y mucho también como relación con lo poético, que me parece que es muy importante, ¿no? Y me parece que también le da como una profundidad a su trabajo. O sea, su trabajo no solamente es, digamos, formal, sino que también hay algo detrás. Por eso le preguntaba también por su formación en lingüística y semiótica y en los sistemas de lenguaje y todo eso, porque quería saber cómo era esa relación de él con el lenguaje, pero además que fascinante esa vida como filmando en tantas locaciones maravillosas, ¿no? O sea, lograr eso me parece que ya es un éxito en sí mismo. O sea, digamos que es un artista muy exitoso en el sentido de que puede vivir de su arte, que es tan difícil vivir del arte para todos los artistas en realidad, ¿no? Muchos tienen que hacer varios trabajos y todo para poder seguir haciendo su arte. Entonces yo creo que hay que seguirlo mirando, y me encanta como también definió su trabajo como de no ficción, porque como que incluye la ficción. O sea, lo no ficcional también incluye la ficción, o sea, que algo sea de no ficción implica la ficcionalidad. Entonces hay algo de ficción siempre en sus trabajos, o sea, eso que él presenta, que nos presenta como con ese realismo documental, me parece que por eso mismo empieza a crear ese distanciamiento que tú dices, Dalí, y ese distanciamiento y ese extrañamiento es lo que le da ese elemento de ficción, y que le da ese elemento de magia, y que le da ese elemento ¿no? de rareza, de qué cosa tan rara eso que estamos viendo, que es ese mundo, ¿no? Porque cuando uno está viendo documentales como esto es demasiado real, esto es demasiado familiar, estoy demasiado familiarizado con esto es la realidad real de todos los días mío, ¿no? Esto es el documental, pero cuando está, digamos, presentando este extrañamiento, yo creo que logra como dar ese otro paso hacia la no ficción, y hacia como ese lugar entre lo uno y lo otro, que combina la ficción con la realidad, y que entonces esa ambigüedad empieza a ser interesante. Esto es lo que me pasa a mí con los trabajos y los cortos de él. ¿Qué más? ¿Qué más quieren decir?
Eh, yo quería decir que, bueno, a mí también pues me gustó mucho su trabajo. Eh, Siento que también es como una exploración propia desde la imagen audiovisual y también desde la temática audiovisual, ¿no? Porque también siento yo que tiene que ver como con la especulación. de los mundos, digamos, como de esas cosmogonías o de esos lugares que como que escapan al entendimiento, digamos, documental, racional, para ponerlo en
Objetivo,
planos
sí.
psicodélicos, ¿no? Y de todas maneras
Ajá.
mostrando que hace parte de un lugar cultural, de un lugar pues que tiene pues esas prácticas, ¿no? Y pues eso me parece muy interesante, también la forma de cómo mostrar digamos, esos temas, pues es una exploración propia de la imagen audiovisual. Entonces, tiene noción tanto como del tema que retrata a nivel documental como de la imagen misma, ¿no? Del tratamiento audiovisual. Sí.
Mm.